This is All Up Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. And are we asking the impossible from the budget tomorrow? Philip Hammond's own position appears to be fragile, to say the least, and he's tasked with reviving his party's fortunes, jump-starting the flagging economy, pumping money into the public service and remaining fiscally responsible. So just how many rabbits does he have in his hat? Joining me to discuss this are the former Shadow Chancellor, Sir Oliver Letwin, and the Labour MP, Rupa Huq. Welcome to you both. Now, Oliver Letwin, I mean, how much room do you think Philip Hammond really has? I mean, you've been inside Number 10, you've looked at budgets. Does he have a scope to achieve any of those things?
Well, I don't think he has some bonanza sitting on his hands. I'd be very surprised if we discover he does. And I think he does need to maintain, and I think he probably thinks he needs to maintain, rightly, a tight fiscal stance so that we reduce the deficit and eventually produce a balanced budget.
Carry on with austerity.
Yeah. Within that, the question therefore arises, is it right to increase taxes somewhat in order to have some more money to spend on social care and the NHS? My own view, as I've said on various occasions, yeah, is that that would be the right thing to do. It's not a rabbit out of a hat. It's taking some money from the public in order to pay some money for public services. And I think his choices are like that. I don't think he can suddenly sort of magic up money from nowhere.
You'd probably agree with that, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, I think we were meant to have balanced the books by 2015, weren't we? And we were meant to have moved into a budget surplus by next year. None of that is happening. I just don't believe anything this lot say anymore.
No, but do you believe it is right to maintain austerity?
I don't, actually. I mean, it should have ended by now. It looks like it's going to be going on for a decade more. All their figures have been completely wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, the goal remains to cut the deficit and eliminate it if possible. Is that worth doing?
Yeah, but we could still be bolder. We could borrow to invest, those kind of things. That yeah, he's got limited wriggle room. I accept that. But I think all this is of their own making.
I think
your word "fragile" is the right one.
Yeah, I mean, you would abandon austerity, would you? I mean,
I think, yeah, that 7 years. What have we got to show for it? I mean, this is, and again, when the other side says, "Oh, your government," when it was in power, it's been 7 years now. It's a bit lame to keep going on with that one.
7 years. What have we got to show for it?
Well, we have a deficit which is a third, probably down to a quarter of what it was when we started.
By now, though.
And it was. Well, yeah, sure, yeah, and life is like that. And the whole problem about borrowing now is that if you engage in borrowing now and things hit us, which they probably will, not just Brexit but many other things, then you'll get into a tailspin again, which is where we were in 2008. No, I think managing the economy is jolly difficult. Getting to balanced budgets, even in quite good times, is jolly difficult. It doesn't mean you should abandon that, because you need to be in a position where you're prepared for the worst.
Well, the argument would be, imagine that we haven't hit the targets which we were told we were going to hit. The economy growth is relatively low. Perhaps borrowing at low interest rates and investing in infrastructure would be a good way of getting the economy going.
Yes, people always imagine that the next time round, somehow, if you engage in huge amounts of borrowing, all will be well. But, it never is. And in the end, if you want to manage the economy sensibly, you have to try to get to the point where you can withstand an external shock. At the moment, the economy is growing, not very fast, but it's growing. And therefore, we should not be in a position where we have ballooning debts again.
It's the slowest growing in the G7. I think Portugal, and depending on which measure you look at it, it's not going well. It should have gone by now. I think we need to change this course of action. Things like child poverty is at the worst since that was recorded, since 1961.
Yeah, but you see, a lot of people do think that there's going to be an external shock.
Well, that's, again, all the unknown unknowns of Brexit that you add into this. The fact that we've got these, the European Medicines Agency relocating, the banking one.
But that's not a time necessary to, therefore, expose the economy, is it?
I mean, I just think it's, for normal people who don't look at the figures, they don't feel their wages have not risen since 2010. Unsecured debt is going up, credit cards, and it's a generational thing as well. The people who work in my office, they're all in their 20s. I said to them this morning, what would you like to see in the budget? The idea of getting a foot rung on the property ladder is a distant dream for them. They can't ever imagine. They're sort of running faster and faster just to stay still on the spot. They're surviving rather than, every generation thinks it will do better than its parents. That's normally, you think that, things will be better for the next generation. We're going backwards.
Is that justified? Should every generation expect to do better than its parents?
Well, no, I think the lesson we are learning is that even in comparison to 1929, the 2008 shock, not just here but around the world, was probably the greatest dislocation economically that any of us have ever experienced. And that is going to take some time to get over. And things have been, exactly as you say, pretty tough for very, very, very large numbers of people in our country. As a result, they have not seen real wages rise. And I think it will be some time before they do.
But at some point people will say, well, therefore the government is failing me, won't they?
Well, in the end, what governments have to try to do is the right thing. Rather than worrying what people will say, they have to try and get it right. And the important thing here is to keep the economy stable so that we don't have a repeat of what we went through in 2008. That really will affect a very, very large number of people. And it will affect our public services, it will affect our long-term stability. So that's the really important thing here.
How does keeping the economy stable prevent what happened in 2008 happening again? I mean, that was...
Because if you're running balanced books and then you have a shock, you can afford to borrow when you have to borrow in order to keep the economy afloat through a shock. The problem in 2008 was we were running much too high in expenditure, so when the shock came and we borrowed into it, rightly at the time, we then ended up with this ballooning debt and deficit. And you can't do that twice. We are now at 86% of our GDP in debt. If we had to do that maneuver all over again, we'd become, you know, simply unfinanceable. So this is really very important that we keep the books balanced and get to the point where they really do balance. But at the same time, I accept the position that the health and social services system is creaking and needs some extra funds. And so I do think we're going to have to bear a bit of extra tax.
Who would you put the tax up on?
Well, I don't think it's so much a matter of who you put it up on. That's a choice which chancellors get to make. I think what's crucial is that it gets hypothecated. Frank Field and I put forward an earlier day motion suggesting, and I strongly believe it's the right thing to do, that the money should be there in a pot for social care and health, not spent generally. And then I think the public would accept a range of different tax rises. They will only accept it if they can see the money is actually going from their pockets into health and social care.
And we've seen tax cuts in corporation tax, in capital gains tax. That doesn't hit most normal people. We've seen the whole scandal of the Paradise Papers, that if you've got clever accountants who know how to do these ruses, it just feels that there's one rule for the super rich, one rule for the normal people.
No, but it's also the case, is it not? I mean, perhaps I'm wrong, but if you want to do the sort of investment which you would like to see, you're not going to do that off the backs of the rich, the super rich, the Paradise Papers. I mean, there needs to be a more general contribution to the Treasury to do the sort of things you want.
I mean, we've always said in our last manifesto that average earners wouldn't pay any more.
Well, exactly,
because
but that's wrong,
who's being hit. Because at the moment, the top 10% own half the nation's wealth, and that's just wrong. We're for the many, not the few. And Oliver is a wise old head, but the current government seem to be fighting like
so you think you can do it from the top 10%?
Yeah, I mean, our manifesto last time around, I don't know if it'll be the manifesto this time around, but I mean, as I say, giving tax cuts to people over 150 grand, which was the last government, that very short, it just looks like misplaced priorities.
You say that.
Well, as a matter of fact, there wasn't a tax cut in the sense that it was at 45%.
Yeah,
and I'm perfectly happy that it should remain so.
Or 50%, as some people say.
I don't have a sort of fetishistic view about the exact top tax rate. But as you rightly say, actually all the evidence is that you don't collect very much more by raising those rates. In fact, when we reduced the rate originally to 40%, we collected more tax revenue from the well-off. One certainly wants to maximise the tax take from the well-off. At what rate you do that is something you can only tell by playing around with it and trying, and I'm sure Philip will try. The tax gap, the measure of the difference between what the Treasury should be collecting and what it is collecting, has hugely reduced. And that's because, for example, George Osborne actually got to work and made sure that all those offshore accounts were transparent to HMRC so they could collect the money from the people who are otherwise trying to shield tax. That's right, we should be collecting money from those people. I think you said in the past, and it's right, we should also be trying to collect money from all the tech giants and the other people who are running companies here. If they're doing transactions in Britain, they should be paying tax.
We've not had the public register that we were promised of beneficial interests. I mean, lots of things. I think this government is kind of good at talk, but the action, so the burning injustice.
I'm in favour of a
What
public
about
register.
cutting corporation tax? Is that necessary?
No.
Well, it's a very difficult balancing act. If you attract by that more investment into the UK, then you get more money from corporation tax. So again, I'm in favour of maximising corporation tax receipts. We should be getting as much money as possible from corporations.
Well, we're already
into
at the
exchequer.
bottom. I mean,
but the question is, if we reduce the rate, do you increase the take or do you reduce the take? If you reduce the take, you shouldn't do it. If you increase the take, you should. I would have thought the Labour Party would agree that it's better to get more money from corporations by having more corporations here rather than getting less money from corporations by having fewer corporations.
Okay, well, let's end with one prediction from each of you, something you think, whether you like it or not, is going to be in the budget
I think
tomorrow.
it'll be another disappointment because all these times they promise things. Remember, we were told no increase in VAT. It went up to 20%, which is the highest it's ever been. We were told no increase in national insurance contributions. In that last budget, it went up for the self-employed. So I predict another litany of broken promises and disappointment.
I predict that he will stick to a steady course and gradually get the deficit down to zero, and I very much hope that is what happens.
Thank you both very much indeed.